Today, we discuss the question, is monarchy still a viable system in the modern world? Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with an apoplectic Charles Coulombe.
Apoplectic? You mean I'm sick and tired, I'm not taking it anymore? Is that what you're talking about, apoplectic?
That's right.
Well, what could have gotten me into such a state of apoplexy, do you think?
I don't know. Were you hit by the tariffs?
Hit by the
Tariffs?
tariffs?
Trump tariffs? Did he crack down on
Oh,
Austria?
yeah. Well, no, the other friend in Austria, he called me and said I was having tariffs raised against me personally.
Who called you and told you that?
President Trump.
Oh, okay.
He said I was going to have to pay 25%.
What'd you say?
I already do that. It's called income tax. He said I do that and hung up.
Wow.
No, seriously, don't ask me to explain the tariffs. I don't understand. I don't understand anything about it. I'm not an economist. I don't know if it's going to work or if it isn't. I read all sorts of people saying all sorts of things about it, and I have no grasp of it. So I'm not going to express an opinion.
Why are you so angry? Is it because the academics talking about colonization and decolonization?
That was actually what got me. And I am, in fact, this is what set me off, was reading this. Are you ready?
Ready.
Now, this is a call for papers. Okay? Here it is. Effective possibilities of post/decolonial eco-literature. As more climate doomsday predictions continue to surface from scientists, journalists, and scholars, the fight to combat global climate collapse can sometimes feel hopeless, petrified by the saturation of negative effects in literary, theoretical, and cultural production. While continuing with neoliberal business as usual is untenable, scholars have begun to recognize that doom and gloom predictions alone actually make individuals less likely to act. Reading through the earlier figurations of post-colonial eco-criticism by Helen Tiffin and Graham Huggin, attuned to the human/non-human relationship, and more recent work that explores other possible modes of engaging with the environment, bad environmentalism, Seymour 2018, or dark ecology, Morton 2018, teases out a new vocabulary to talk about the climate crisis. This panel addresses the role of eco-literature in navigating the tension between negative and positive effects. By the way, effects is always spelled incorrectly with an A, just so you know. Given that our very culture is defined by overconsumption and exploitation of natural resources such as oil, Seisman et al. 2017, how can literature disrupt imaginaries and inspire action through positive effects? Since climate change often disproportionately impacts colonized populations and then burdens these same populations with the work of conservation, this panel will focus on post-colonial and decolonial literature and theory that tackle this question. It will focus not just on the resilience and survival of people, but on how they build, create, and thrive in environments that have been irrevocably damaged or destroyed by extractive practices. How does literary production in all its forms, performance, speculative fiction, graphic novels, online blogs or posts, etc., inspire positive action? This panel welcomes papers that explore the possibilities and limits of post/decolonial literature, theory, and affect in addressing the climate emergency. End of quote. Now, I don't know or care where an individual does or doesn't stand on the climate issues. All I can tell you is that whatever that's for, and I'm not quite sure I can tell you because I don't know, I can't understand it really, I'm against it.
You're against post-colonial eco-literature?
Yeah, definitely. I absolutely. I stand forthright
Why?
against it. Because it's gibberish. That's why. I mean, you could mean anything by it, anything at all. I mean, the use of language there. If I were if I were a passionate foe of climate change, I would find that insulting and obnoxious. If I didn't believe in climate change, I would find it insulting and obnoxious. If I believed almost anything, pro, con, or nothing about climate change, I would find that whole thing an essay in patronizing drivel.
I mean, so you're not in favor of extractive practices?
Everyone's benefiting from them.
Not the
Everything
Earth.
we're doing right now.
Not the Earth.
Well, the Earth doesn't get a say. The Earth just gets beaten and abused. Gaia is screaming as we speak. Gaia is just being kicked around. I mean, I hope she's into S&M because boy is she getting it.
The Earth, quote unquote, the Earth doesn't get a say. Charles Coulombe.
That's right. Well, the Earth doesn't have a voice. That's why it's hard for it to get a say.
Mother Nature.
I mean,
Mother Nature
Mother
doesn't.
Nature.
It's crying. She's
Mother
crying
Nature,
out.
Mother Nature is a human construct, smart guy. Yeah, I got you there.
Now who's making up big words and gibberish? A human construct?
A human construct. Human nature, Mother Nature is an anthropomorphization of blind forces. Why is it that the same people, when they want to deny God, will say there's no such thing as intelligent design in nature? But when they want to talk the environment, suddenly the planet's crying.
I don't follow.
No, I thought you might. Let's put it this another way. It would make perfect sense to me if you were to say that God, having created, creation, and man being the reasoning creature that he is, put in charge of it, has an obligation to act as a good steward. Now that makes sense to me. But
yeah, that's what she said.
No, it's not at all what she said. No.
What'd she say?
No. Well, she couldn't tell you, so why should I? You see, in my experience, and I do have some, if people can't make or don't make clear points, it's because they don't have clear points to make. Language of that sort is a means of dominance. It's a jargon. It's a structure of power. It's basically made to discern those in power from those out of power. And in this case, those in power are self-proclaimed academics. And if you don't speak the jargon, well, it's like not speaking Latin 200 years ago in theological circles or in Hungary. If you didn't speak Latin, well, then obviously you're amongst the hoi polloi, and we know what they deserve from the pre-show. So it's ironic to me that when academics talk about structures of power and colonization and all the rest of it, because if ever there was an example of it, it's academia. I mean, they are the new mandarins. They are the high priests of Baal.
Well, maybe
so
it's kind of like communism, like conceptually, where it's like you have to have people to set up the structure of government in order to give it to the people. So there is no structure. I mean, so
to give it
everyone
to the
can live in
people
harmony.
good and hard.
Yeah.
To give it to the people good and hard. Yeah, I know. I saw that show. I came in on that one. I know all about that show. See, one of the joys of growing up in LA in the 60s and 70s was you had all sorts of refugees from communism. And boy, did they have stories to tell. You know, it always amazed me that we very happily listened, and rightly so, to Holocaust survivors. But the survivors of communism never got the same hearing.
Dr. Zhivago.
That was as close as it came. That was one film.
Okay, I guess so.
Sound of Music. Oh, Julia. Oh, so they were all about the Nazis. See, this is my point.
Yeah.
Other than Dr. Zhivago, you can't name, except maybe Nicholas and Alexandra, you can't name a film that really dealt with the birth of communism in anything approaching a semi-objective way.
And that is true. I mean, as you say that, I want to see a movie on that. You know, that's one of
Well, you can't.
those
You
unmade
can't.
movies that just have never happened for mind-boggling reasons, you know?
No, it's not particularly mind-boggling. The establishment was soft on the Reds, and I think part of the anti-Russian residue, and I'm not saying all of it, and I'm not saying that this excuses the attack on Ukraine. I'm not saying anything like that. But I do believe that part of the anti-Russian residue amongst some of our elites are the fact that they abandoned communism. You know, so many of the older people who are warmongers now were peaceniks back when the communists were running the Kremlin. So what happened to that? What happened to better red than dead?
Wait, what? You mean better dead than red? You said better.
No, I said better red than dead. That's what that is what the anti-war movement said in the 60s and the 70s.
Really?
Yeah, better red than dead. In other words, it was better to lose to the Soviets than to have the planet obliterated through a nuclear holocaust.
Wow.
Boomer History 101.
I don't know if that's widely disseminated information. Better red than dead.
Yeah,
That is, no, I mean I believe you, Charles. But it's just.
I'm just curious. I've never looked it up. I remember it well enough.
I think
better
it's
red
not
than dead.
widely known because it's a pretty bad optics, to be honest.
Well, this is from Wikipedia, source of all truth. Better dead than red, and the reverse, better red than dead, are dueling slogans regarding communism and generally socialism. The former an anti-communist slogan, rather dead than a communist, and the latter a pro-communist slogan, rather a communist than dead. The slogans are interlingual. There's one of the moron phrases, interlingual, with a variety of variants among them. What else would you have a variance but a variety? That doesn't make sense. Anyway, the slogans became widespread during the Cold War, first gaining currency in the United States during the late 1950s and debates about anti-communism and nuclear disarmament. The first phrase, better red than dead, is often credited to British philosopher Bertrand Russell, but in his 1961 Has Man a Future, he attributes it to West German Friends of Peace. In any event, Russell agreed with the statement, having written in 1958 that if, quote, no alternatives remain except communist domination or extinction of the human race, the former alternative is the lesser of two evils. And the slogan was adopted by the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, which he helped found. So it goes on. But I remember that.
I mean, that's such a simple logical fallacy. Well, it's one or the other. Lol. Like that's so. It amazes me how. That's just one of the most basic logical fallacies. Well, it's this or this, and there's no in between. And that's our entire political system is based on that, actually.
Yeah, and you've got to choose. You got to make a choice, and you're wrong if you make the wrong choice, and you're evil, and you should be hurt badly. No, so that better, But my question is, what happened to all of that? And it's evaporated. Now, contrary-wise, before communism fell, There was a movie that came out in 1979 or 80 called Reds
Okay.
about a fellow called John Reed, who was an American convert to Marxism and became a hero of the Soviet Union. He was an American journalist who went to Russia and fell in love with communism. Well, basically, what year was that? 76 or 77?
What, the
When did that
movie?
come out? Yeah,
81 it says.
81.
Yeah.
Well, in those days, I mean, a lot of it, well, there were interviews with surviving pro-communists. Yeah, 1981. Surviving pro-communists of that era. Bear in mind, it was like 70 years after the thing, but it says the film also features as witnesses interviews with the 98-year-old radical educator and peace activist Scott Nearing, author Dorothy Frooks, reporter and author George Seldes, civil liberties advocate Roger Baldwin, and the American writer Henry Miller. These people, when they first started on the thing in the late 70s, were all alive, you know, and they were all just as pro-communist as they had been back in 1917. But my question at the time, at least because I actually knew people who had been on that side, was why no one ever had the idea of making a film calling it Whites about the opposition of the Reds during the Russian Civil War. You never saw that. Even Dr. Zhivago, he's more of a neutral character. You'll notice the Whites are basically, you see them get killed, but you don't really get much insight into them.
Right. Right.
So, but that's something that we wouldn't do back then. Now, fast forward, all these years later, we won't engage with any of that,
Well, we are
And
making. Oh, sorry. Go on.
well, I was just going to say, uh, 10 years ago and 20 years ago, one of the great things to see was how Russia was coming to terms with that. But the past 10 years, all of that's been unraveled. And now, as part of trying to rally every bit of Russian patriotism of whatever kind he can, Putin has brought out the red flags and the Lenin statues again, which, shows that he really had no fixed principles to begin with. What Russia needs, one way or the other, is to be purged of all of that, you know. But the fact that the thing that began this Cold War with Russia back in 2013 was their anti-LGBT proselytization law. But again, lest you be quick to canonize Putin, abortion is still legal in Russia. It's part of the culture in a way it's in very few other places, even in the States. But of course, it was imposed by the Soviets in 1918. Russia was the first country to legalize abortion after the revolution. And even though Putin will say that he's against it, and even though the current Patriarch of Moscow, when he was the Metropolitan of Smolensk, said that the Catholic Church was their great ally in the fight against it, it's still legal. And if I'm going to use the abortion issue as a measure to look at Mr. Trump, I certainly have to use it as a measure to look at Mr. Putin, don't I?
Yeah.
Who speaks for the infants?
I don't know. But I think we are making a little bit of progress. You just sort of jarred loose a memory, which is that there's a musical going on in the area. in various performing arts centers in Southern California. It's called China Before Communism. I don't know if you've seen that, but obviously in Southern California we have a great deal of Chinese immigration over here, especially in various cities, and so that's of special note over here, I think, and I think that's why there's a lot of that performed over here. So to me, that's a good sign, at least, and it's to show it's sort of like what the first half of Dr. Zhivago is for Russia. That's the sort of the musical version for China, which is sort of the beauty of it.
It's true. The Shen Yun have put it on. That's interesting. The China Before Communism.
Yeah.
The Shen Yun Company.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All right. Moving on, as one does. All right. Couple things happened over the weekend. Kind of a little bit of a controversy. I had to clear a little bit of heat directed to Tumbler House's way. I had to clear it up. I'll just read it out here. Tumbler House has come under fire recently, so let me address those concerns.
Hold on. Is this is in the interest of transparency, isn't it? You're afraid that the Center for Concern is going to put Tumbler House on Transparency Watch.
I am not in the. What did you just say?
The Center for Concern.
What's the Center for Concern?
You never heard of the Center for Concern? Well, it's a group of concerned individuals who are fearful that there's a lack of transparency in the country and the world. And so they have what they call Transparency Watch. And if they feel that a private organization, a business corporation, a government body are not sufficiently transparent, then they put them on Transparency Watch. Now, mind you, you can avoid this terrible outcome by sending them $10,000 as a donation to their work.
Yeah, I don't do that.
What? No, it's very important because the Center for Concern is all about concern. They're very worried about what's going on in the world today.
Yeah, but I don't think all that's needed. I mean, I think we do have something on the calendar for them. It's not on my calendar. It's on Tyrone's calendar. So, I really don't think it's a big deal, Charles. You're making it into a big deal. I don't think it's a big deal. I think after that meeting, everything's going to be fine, really. So.
Okay, but they're very concerned. They thought they were thinking of issuing a fatwa. No, not a fatwa. They don't call it that. A warning, a Transparency Watch warning. But we'll see.
Yeah.
But usually, most people stay off the Transparency Watch list by anteing up $10,000.
Sure, absolutely. Now there's
a lot of Southern Poverty.
A lot of different avenues.
A
lot of different avenues. It's gonna be interesting. Tyrone's really good at that. All right. So yeah, Tumbler House has come under fire recently. So let me address those concerns. We deeply care about our employees' financial and spiritual well-being. All of our low-level employees are called to a life of penitence and mortification, living a life poor in spirit, like Saint Francis of Assisi. Our top-floor executives are called to be like King Solomon, with great riches, but using their wisdom to equitably disperse the goods to God's people. We are all called to different roles in the kingdom of God, with no one role greater than the other. I hope that clears things up. Yeah.
That is so beautiful.
It is beautiful. I mean, isn't it true?
Yeah, sure.
I
don't want to be punished again, so I'll agree.
Okay. I mean, what's more money, more problems, in the words of Notorious B.I.G. and P. Diddy, right? Like, it is a burden to have wealth. it's hard. You told me yourself you have to be a genius to protect it.
Well, that's true, but I'd be willing to share. I'd be willing to share the burden.
No, I don't want to put that burden on on
On
anyone.
anyone. Yes, that's very touching. I can't tell you how touched I am right here.
So, anyhow, a lot of people thought I was joking because it was I had happened to publish on April 1st, but it's pretty serious business. So
let me tell you something. On April 1st, I alerted the public to my forthcoming book.
I thought you alerted. I thought you were the historian for the Daughters of the American Revolution.
I did, yes. I got that. They wanted to reward me for my writings about the revolution.
Yeah.
But I've got a new book coming out called Karl Renner, Hero and Saint.
Ooh, is that on the Battle of Los Angeles?
Yeah, actually, it was written on the back of another book about it, about the battle. Karl Renner was at the Battle of Los Angeles. He was a German spy.
Oh, you said Renner. I thought you said Ronner. Okay, no.
Well,
no.
Karl Renner did for Austria what Karl Rahner did for the church.
Oh, there you go.
And about as well too.
Who did Karl Rahner sell out to, though? I mean, I thought Karl Renner's
Renner, not Rahner.
I know, but I mean, like Renner at least sold out.
Yeah. Oh, Rahner didn't sell anything, but well, that's not entirely true. I mean, God knows he was well paid by various sources in the United States, the American Church. I mean, that was always the thing. European lecturers like Taylor de Chardin and Karl Rahner would come to the States and really cash in. We were very impressed by their foreign accents and their intricate sounding words.
That makes sense. All right. In other news, in other serious business, local author has come out with a new book, The Complete Monarchist by Charles Coulombe, forward by Ada Nichols, OP. Wow. Not published by Tumblr House and a different press, but we've wholeheartedly endorsed it. Charles, would you like to plug the book, so to speak?
Yeah, buy it. Oh, no, there should be more to it than that, I think. Well, what it is, actually, it's a collection of some of my writings about monarchy over the years. Theoretically, in terms of theory, in terms of practice. And it includes a section, an article I wrote called Confessions of an American Monarchist, which explained how I became one and why. But there's a lot of other stuff in it. Father Ada Nichols, my favorite living theologian, wrote the foreword, for which I'm very honored. You know, the whole point of the thing really was to present monarchy, Catholic monarchy, not the sort of crown republics that we have in most of Europe today, but an effective Catholic Christian monarchy as a real alternative to the kinds of slavery we enjoy today in most places that go by the names of republics, democracies, you know, whatever we call them, whatever they're calling themselves now. I mean, I do believe that in the aftermath of COVID, we do need to take a long, hard look at everything. My joke, as you remember, during the COVID days, was when they had us put our masks on, they took theirs off. Well, their toys have a lot more freedom now. You know, we're back to semi-normality, but nothing's changed. You know, in France, the regime have very obviously arranged the court so that Madame Le Pen can't face the polls. They do everything they can here in Austria and in Germany and elsewhere to squeeze out people they consider unsavory, despite being the majority. Well, that's fine if you're going to admit you don't believe in democracy, but they can't do that. So they've got a problem. if the democracy they claim they believe in is permitted, it will bring in people they don't want, and they'll be out of a job. But they can't very well tell the truth, which is we're in charge, we're wonderful, and we should be here forever. They can't say that. And of course, they still preserve the party names. But one thing we found in Europe, anyway, is that when it comes to keeping out the unwashed, their party differences vanish completely. But of course, the more leftist of them, the more green, the more woke, are the ones who want something more than just government employment. So knowing what they want, they push these weird coalitions ever to the left. So, for instance, in Germany, they're really pushing as the price of the new coalition to keep the AFD out, abortion, huge liberalization on abortion. And that they know what they want, and that's more important to them. Whereas their quote unquote conservative partners are just about staying in power. So they really could care less. Abortion, sure, slaughter the kids, who cares? As long as I'm still in charge, still getting my salary, and still playing with the populace as though they were chess pieces. What makes it worse in Europe, of course, this fecklessness is a result of not having to make real decisions since 1945. And then Mr. Vance comes along, and actually, at Munich, say what you like about Vance the Trumpster. At Munich, Vance did a magnificent job of calling out the European elites on what they're actually doing. So much so, I felt it would be nice if someone could say something similar to the Americans, but that's not going to happen. So they got all upset, and the Chancellor of Germany said, I hate to say it, but it's time we declared independence from the United States. Yeah, well, good luck. They've been dependent on us since 1945, as I say, and you don't get over that overnight. And that independence they seek is only because they see the current administration being sympathetic with their opponents. At the same time, you have the chief of security in Germany, the federal chief of the security service, say that the best thing for Europe would be if the Ukraine war lasted another 5 years. I mean, is he out of his ever-living mind? When people say things like that, you almost feel like saying they deserve to have the war in their own backyards to find out what it's like. I just don't know.
Yeah. The democratic myth is really crumbling. I think authority residing in the people, that concept. I mean, less people are buying into that. A government of the people, by the people, for the people, as Lincoln said. That seems far-fetched now.
Well, it's become more like what Oscar Wilde defined democracy as, which was the bludgeoning of the people, by the people, for the people.
See, now that resonates. That
resonates. That makes sense. I mean,
that's quite literally the lockdown. A bludgeoning of the people, by the people, for the people.
For the people. And the people helped because, of course, if you were violating the lockdown, who would report you?
Yeah.
There was the very funny meme where the woman says, "Yes, I'd like to report a family not living in fear."
Right.
I got a kick out of that. But the biggest problem, however, and this is something which basically cannot be solved by us, and that is the issue of the royals themselves. Because to make a difference in this mess, they would have to stand up and be counted. That is to say, some of them anyway, would have to be heroes. But there's a problem with that. Each of these families has a long history of seeing their heroic members get killed, exiled, or both. And nobody standing up for those people. And while I would like to see a Habsburg or a Bourbon or a Savoy or the King stand up and say, all right, finita la commedia, and rally around me. I'd love to see that. But I wrote an article which appears in the book, by the way, called the Aragorn option. The problem is to ask one of these people to be heroic in a way that the vast majority of us can't be, won't be. You can't. It either has to come from them or not. And you can't expect them to do it because you wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, as we're kind of seeing some of these heroic figures who sort of make real change, it's becoming more and more apparent that if you want to be one of those people, you are going to have to pay the iron price. You're going to have to basically be Christ crucified on the cross. You're going to have to just live your life, be a martyr, honestly. You know?
Yeah, and who can we ask
Yeah.
to be a martyr other than ourselves?
Right.
You know? And God forbid we should get angry about what's wrong with you? Why aren't you being a martyr? Well, gee, I don't know. How come you're not? See, it has come to me. This is the basic problem for and with monarchism. It does rely on the monarch, especially in terms of coming back, on the monarch to be a hero. And in the past few centuries, that heroism has usually meant a terrible price to be paid. And I think that possibly the math is the price was paid because the hero didn't have subjects worthy of him. I had a fellow today write on my Twitter account that the day of the Habsburgs had passed. And when I read that, my immediate response was, perhaps the day of decency has passed. Perhaps we're ruled by the swine we deserve. Or to put this another way, let's take Blessed Karl. Now, this was a man who literally gave his all for his peoples, who, when he was dying, said he was suffering that they might come back together. And personally, I cannot help but feel that sacrifice will not forever go unheeded or in vain. I cannot help but feel that somehow, sooner or later, his peoples will come back together. And I don't see any other way they can do that except with the participation of his descendants. Because they all loathe each other so much. But the childish way they fought amongst each other to the mutual ruin of them all, did they deserve better than what they got? He certainly did. But who rallied to him? You know? And even a great hero like Field Marshal Borevich, who showed up at the nth degree, pulled his army out of the wreck of the Italian front, sends a telegram to the emperor saying, I have an army, I can bring it to Vienna to maintain order, which would have changed everything. He sends that telegram to the Vienna garrison, whose commander had already gone over to Karl Renner. So, and not only did he refuse to accept it, not only did he not pass it on to the emperor, who never saw it, He refused it in the emperor's name. Do we deserve better than the Karl Renners and the Admiral Horthys? Do we deserve better than that, than the Thomas Mazureks?
Right. Well, from the answer is no, from our lowly peon perspective. But I think, again, whoever decides to be a hero is not going to think on those terms in that
No.
way.
No, he'll just think of his duty, and he'll think he's got to follow it to the end, like Blessed Emperor Karl. And I pray that if such a figure arises in our time, that I have the guts to follow him to the end. But, you know, the original version of this story was in the Garden of Gethsemane. You know, I'll stand by you. I'll stand by you. You know, they asked Cardinal Ottaviani if he could find any proof of collegiality in the Bible. And he pointed out the first collegiate act of the Catholic hierarchy. And they all fled. But every Catholic monarch, every Christian monarch that stands up for his people is basically called on to participate in the kingship of Christ. And that sometimes leads to the triumph of Palm Sunday, but very often it goes to Good Friday. You know, Palm Sunday was the height of Christ's political success. That was when he entered Jerusalem. Hosanna to the Son of David. He entered Jerusalem as the king. And within a week, the same mob that hailed him had crucified him. And yet, by the same token, he said, and I'm sure he meant it, I will have mercy upon the multitude. I will have compassion upon the multitude. And forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. You know, the funny thing, the man who more than anyone else, as far as Hungary went, messed up Emperor Karl, was Admiral Horthy, who twice defeated his efforts to retake the Hungarian throne. Well, as a result of World War II, he ended up in exile in Lisbon. Sometime in the 50s, he was dying. And he asked the Archduke Otto to come to Lisbon as he was dying. And he asked his forgiveness. And the Archduke gave it to him, because it was what his father would have done. I don't have that kind of greatness, but I'm not a royal. And all we can do at the moment is get our own minds right, understand the concepts, the ideas, and pray that pray for better out of the royals than we're capable of demanding out of ourselves.
All right. So we started this little bit speaking about your book, A Shameless Plug. I'm just going to finish to that end. It's available on the Tumblr House website. This book retails for $20. It's 300 pages long.
Wow.
Yeah. So go ahead and click the link on the screen right now. All right. Moving on. So
move along now. Nothing to see here. Move along. You've all got homes to go to. Move along now. Move along.
We had so we put out the question: is monarchy viable in is it a viable system in the modern world? So obviously this is right in the wheelhouse of our audience. So we have a tremendous amount of replies. So the rest of the show is just going to be dedicated to discussing what a bunch of you have said. Before we get into that, next week's discussion topic is going to be underrated Catholic figures. We're asking for submissions about little-known saints, thinkers, or historical figures who deserve more attention. And we're going to do this on the Patron thread, and it's going to be available to everyone, not just patrons. So if you aren't a patron, you're going to be able to find that if you go to patreon.com/TumblrHouse.
Now, before the show, we were discussing this, and I asked, what about Joe Biden?
And I suggested write an article on it for your people. Give the people what they want, good and hard.
They won't want it so hard next time. And then we also discussed another great theologian, Jackie Gleason.
That's right. Good old Jackie Gleason.
He was great. He was also reconciled to the church before he died. So there.
That's right. All right. So let's get into it. We're going to start with a comment, a lot of thought from Carl, who says, while I have always been a monarchist, my thoughts have evolved over time, largely due to Charles. In particular, you must have a properly ordered society to have a successful monarch, meaning our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ must come first, with a fully independent and apostolic church, such as Roman Catholicism and Orthodoxy, being the one to anoint and hold accountable installed monarchs. To pick on England, 1 out of every 3 pregnancies ends in abortion, yet they consistently need immigration in their system to keep pensions flowing. Is that a properly ordered society? Undoubtedly, we are no better. Countries such as Georgia seem to be on the right path. Additionally, when being a part of a Serbian Orthodox parish during the bishop's visit, he prayed for the reinstatement of Serbia's rightful king. The bottom line is that a monarch must know that the only way they obtain the throne and keep it is to remain in good standing with Christ and his church, as opposed to the monarch being head of the state church, which has devolved into politicians being in charge of both the monarch and the state church. Though destroying the infrastructure of monarchy, however deficient, leads to no good place. Case in point, it was fascinating to hear a recent interview of a Saudi prince by Tucker Carlson. In that interview, Tucker Carlson acknowledged that the monarchies of the Middle East are in much better shape than the surrounding republics. In fact, the point has been made that the least democratic governments in the world had some of the most freedoms during COVID. Indeed, we the people are our own worst enemy, and only our Lord and Savior can protect us from ourselves. Let's look at this another way. However flawed, if you are offered a random vacation to a country that begins its name with the Kingdom of or the Democratic Republic of, which would you choose? It's interesting. Charles, what are your thoughts on this, on some of these governments he names? Georgia, Saudi Arabia, some of these things. Are they doing good? Why are they doing well? What do you think is the basis for that?
Well, let's put it this way. Where the Muslim monarchies do well is a feature of whatever they do that's connected to the natural law that we've gotten rid of. See, we're post-Christian in Europe and America, and we no longer accept the, you've got the natural law, which is engraved on man's heart. It's the way things, everybody, regardless of religion, ought to accept. And then there's the law that comes through revelation, the Christian law, the Catholic law. What the Muslims have retained of the natural law is actually more than we have. And so to that degree, their societies function better. They don't function as well as Christian societies did, or as they might in the future, but they do on a very basic level when it comes to the most basic questions. They do function better than we do now because we are no longer Christian. We are this weird glop of whatever it is we are. And I mean, you'll see bits and pieces of that in places like Thailand, and Cambodia, which God knows have problems of their own. But in certain areas outside of tourist zones where they cater to Americans and Europeans doing all sorts of weird things, they are in certain ways a bit better off than we are. But that I suppose that's the best way I can sum it up. To the degree that they follow the natural law, to that degree they're better off than we are. To the degree that they are enemies of our religion, they're not so great. And of course, being human, there's always a certain amount of hypocrisy. I mean, they're very puritanical societies in some ways, but the elites tend to benefit very much from Western decadence in certain times and places.
Do those monarchies de facto, just by how they're doing now, does that prove that monarchy can be viable today in different settings, like in Europe?
Well, I mean, yeah, it let's put it this way. In my humble estimation, the best of the Muslim monarchies is Jordan. And they have problems, but the Christians are in the best setup possible in Jordan. The Arabian monarchies, especially Saudi Arabia, you don't want to be a Catholic. It's in the Gulf states, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, and United Arab Emirates. Foreign Catholics are, if anything, fostered by the kings. But you still, if you're a native, you can't join the church. You'll run into trouble. You may even be executed. So, that's kind of an issue. And then Saudi Arabia, you can't even worship in the Gulf states and all that I mentioned. All of the properties the Catholic Church has been given them by the local kings and emirs and so forth.
Just to play off that, we have a person on Twitter with the moniker Christus Vinci. He says, in answering the question, not with diversity, but if you took care of that, then yes, absolutely. What would you say to that?
Not with diversity. I don't know what he means.
I guess a diverse society would not be able to have a monarchy.
Well, no, I would disagree. In fact, I would say that it's easier for a monarchy to have a diverse society than a republic, because a monarch, and again, this is historical performance. You look at Austria-Hungary, you look at Russia, you look at the British Empire, you look at the Spanish Empire, the Portuguese Empire. All of these polities were able, and the Holy Roman Empire, of course, the Byzantines, all of these polities were able to tolerate an amount of diversity that's not possible in a republic, because one can be personally loyal to the monarch under one's own laws, one's own. France, under the monarchy, you were loyal to the king, but it might be because if you were a Breton, he was the Duke of Brittany. In Austria-Hungary, it was the same. I mean, you look at Spain, you look at all these countries, one of the hallmarks of traditional Catholic monarchy was always local liberties, provincial rights, the fueros. So Whereas in a republic, you can't really tolerate that. Even the non-Catholic populations of places like Austria-Hungary, they had a specific place in the setup. Same with the Jews, for that matter. One reason why Hitler hated the Habsburgs was because the Jews had a particular spot in predominantly Catholic Austria-Hungary. There's a famous story of Franz Josef coming out of the Kaiservilla in Ischl. There's a bridge that goes to the park that the villa is in, across the river into the town of Ischl. So he and a group of his officers were crossing the bridge, and 3 or 4 Jewish laymen and a rabbi were coming this way toward the park because people could wander freely in the park. Well, when they saw who he was, the Jewish laymen dropped to their knees, but the rabbi turned his back on him, pulls the book out, starts rocking back and forth, and quietly chanting something. Well, the officers thought this was some kind of an insult, so they started to go toward him, but the emperor said, "Nope, nope, I'll tell you what it's about in a minute." So they get over the bridge, and the emperor turns to them and says, "What the rabbi was doing, you didn't recognize it, but I certainly did. He was saying their prayer for the emperor in Hebrew. And if you thought I was going to let you stop him from doing that, you're nuts. Can use all the help I can get." But so I would say that well, the Stuart kings of England, Scotland, and Ireland, were quite able to reign over each country according to its own laws and its own constitution. That's the kind of diversity that monarchy is capable of. But of course, that may not be what our correspondent meant at all. So I don't know.
All right. Michael says, in the current environment, no, monarchy is not a viable system. The remaining crowned heads of Europe have been brainwashed into bending the knee to almighty democracy, just as their subjects have been. As fond as I am of them, I doubt any of them have the disposition to reign as sovereigns should. In the U.S., most people are far too enamored of the current Republican form of government to willingly follow a king or queen. But Our Lady of Akita warned of a horrible chastisement if humanity didn't repent and amend its collective life post-haste. We haven't. It follows that the Father's just punishment is just over the horizon. In its aftermath, monarchy is the most likely outcome, as Our Lady also spoke of a glorious restoration of Mother Church, which I assume will include a rightly ordered social order. Monarchy is a part of that.
Well, I can't really argue with any of that.
Yeah. With the chastisement, I wonder what people think when it comes for the coming chastisement. I know for a bunch of the mystics, who communicate with Jesus, like Sister Josepha, Jesus would say something like, we need, please suffer for this person, otherwise I'm going to leave him to his own devices. And I always wonder, we expect like a meteor or something extraordinary, but it could quite simply be us being left to our own devices.
Well, yeah, I mean, very, very, very often, the way we are punished for our sins is just the normal consequences of them being allowed to catch up with us.
Exactly. All right. Lady O' the Roses says, monarchy is an, quote, affair of the heart. One need only to point to Robin Hood's declaration, I loved no man in the world so well as my king. The reference in various Jacobite songs of the true heir as my true love and my darling, and the Austrians continuing to loyally toast the emperor even after the infestation of the Republic, to name but a few examples. It is self-sacrificing, as loving something other than oneself, whereas democracy seems more infatuated with myself. my rights and what's due to me. Does anyone, even its proponents, claim to love the federal government? We have never had such an efficient and all encompassing tyranny as we do today, represented by elected officials, and so meekly swallowed and hurrahed by the ignorant masses who do not watch off the menu. Of course,
Well,
the multitude of royal saints, from King David to Blessed Karl, is also a big tip-off. Catholics should note that democracy, as we know it, did not exist until after the Protestant Revolt. Would you agree with that, Charles?
well, I would. I mean, and certainly that aspect of monarchy, its psychological, if you will, connection, its natural ties to us. Uh, Charles Coulombe, in his book 1981, Splendor and Exile, had a very interesting comment, which I'll read. He said, regardless of his personal imperfections, a monarch represents the majesty of history. He is an heir, a link in a chain that leads to the Middle Ages, that in turn connects to antiquity and beyond, to the beginning of measured time, when the first hero slew the dragon of disorder and established the rule of law. And in return, of course, you have the kind of devotion to the monarch that she speaks of.
You know, we were talking about this before the show, where it seems attached to monarchy is the concept of tradition, and whether you agree in the concept of tradition. And and a lot of people view that tradition as standing in the way of progress. But that, again, that's a logical fallacy. Just like I was harping on about earlier, it's one or the other, tradition or progress. Which is it? Well, no, that's not that's not how it works.
No. Well, you remember one of the interesting things about Star Trek was that the Starfleet was it was all naval traditions from old Earth.
Right.
You remember all the Enterprise, the Constellation, all of these starships had the names of American battleships and American aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
Well, that was done on purpose. And every now and then they would do things like Scotty would appear in a ceremonial kilt.
Yeah.
Well, that was sort of an approximation of the way that tradition adapts to new circumstances. You know, it's like in our courts, including the Supreme Court, when the court opens up, the bailiff comes out and he says, "God save the United States and this honorable court." Well, that was originally "God save the King and this honorable court." We brought that over, and then after the Revolution, we changed it.
Right.
But the tradition continues because tradition, you can't live without it. And I'm talking about tradition with a small t. It provides a connection. I mean, you look, for instance, at armor in any army you like. Most army units will claim descent from cavalry units. Now there haven't been any horse cavalry in the United States Army except for show troops. There hasn't been a functional cavalry regiment in the U.S. Army since the 1940s. But they still have the red and white pennants. They still play Gary Owen. They still have the yellow stripe. The same with the artillery. Artillery today is all self-propelled howitzers that look like tanks, but they still call them the red legs with the red stripe up the side. They still invoke St. Barbara as the patroness of the artillery. That you'll find that in everything. Look at this inauguration with Mr. Trump. Why do you think our inaugurations are done in a certain manner, in a certain style? Now, mind you, they're no longer as formal as they were. No morning coats, but you still have the parade. You have the oath sworn on the Bible with the Chief Justice of the United States. There's all the pomp and ceremony. Why do we do that? Well, we do it because it's a human need. Why is it so disruptive when things? And now I'm not talking about the intrinsic meaning or need for this or that particular ceremony, because they all have different origins. But why, as a whole, do we cherish them? Well, we cherish them because they make the horrors of everyday life more bearable. Look at academia. I mean, no matter how wild and crazy and liberal Harvard and the rest of them may be, oh, they love their caps and gowns at graduation, don't they? They, you've got these. In most universities, they'll have an official carrying a mace. Well, what was that mace originally? It was a sign of royal authority, protecting and patronizing the university. Now we just have maces because universities have maces. We don't remember what they're for, but we just do them. You know, the hoods, the academic hoods, that comes to the monks and the monastic schools. You know, when I graduated here 2 years ago, I took my cap off and I pulled the hood over my head and I said, now this is the way it's supposed to be worn. Everyone looked at me a little oddly, but but it, you know, so to progress, I think it's worth saying, is not possible without tradition because it has to be grounded in something psychologically. And the truth is, in Europe and the European countries overseas, the learned societies, the academies of the arts and sciences, were founded and chartered and patronized by who? The monarchs. The Académie Française, the Royal Society in England. It was the kings who put these things together because they had an interest in everything their peoples were doing and wanted to help them advance in the sciences, advance in the arts, advance in agriculture.
All right. Moving on. Andrew from New Jersey.
The royal province of New Jersey, with its capitals at Perth Amboy and Burlington, and its last rightful governor being William Franklin. Had to say that.
All right. Well, Andrew says, unfortunately, monarchy is not viable in the modern world such as it is. Democracy also is becoming increasingly untenable, but it is more likely to be replaced by some flavor of authoritarianism than Christian monarchy, because Catholics today simply do not heed the Great Commission. I don't speak smugly, for I am also a great offender of this. We can only have Christian monarchy with a Christian people. Until we make serious efforts to evangelize, whatever replaces what we have now will not be monarchy. One can make the argument that we have already turned oligarchy and are on our way to dictatorship. Whether that dictatorship will be in the style of Franco, Cromwell, or Castro remains to be seen. Ooh, Charles, what do you say to this?
I really can't argue with it. I really can't. Joe Sixpack wants his abortions and he wants his contraception. So he'll get a master that he deserves.
So it seems like the basis of the opinion regarding this question is lies on the belief of people and what people are capable of in this modern world.
Well, to a great degree, because you got to bear in mind, although democracy, as we were taught it in school, is a myth, it is true that every regime, to a greater or lesser degree, does, in a strangely symbiotic manner, rest on the most grudging assent of the people. I mean, why did the Soviet Union fall? It fell because it was sustained because for most of its history, it was able to provide the bare minimum. And so it was more trouble than it was worth to the vast majority of people to act against the regime. It was annoying, it was painful, it was this, it was that. But most people, if they kept their head down, did as they were told, well, then there was the old axiom: we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. And so it went on until it didn't work anymore. And when they could no longer, when the regime could no longer do the very bare minimum, it collapsed. And then it was replaced. You need the most grudging assent of a majority to stay in power. But that grudging assent doesn't have to be huge. It's just got to be, this is more trouble than it's worth to do anything other than what I'm doing. So, but in other words, for there to be a real change, people generally have to be desperate. People ask, how could Hitler come to power? Well, Hitler could come to power because people were starving in Germany. That's how. And he promised he'd make a difference, and he did for a while. And then he made a big difference. Probably not the one they would have liked, but you know, unfortunately, when you buy a ticket, you take your ride.
All right. Anita says, what form of government has been most prevalent throughout human history? Monarchy. What form of government most resembles the family? Monarchy. What form of government do we always end up resorting to when society devolves into chaos? Ruled by a strong man, a monarch. What form of government did Christ establish for his church? Monarchy. Is Christ himself a king or a president? Monarchy is the form of government most in line with human nature. Democracy is the LARP. Democracy requires us to do violence to our nature and to suppress our noblest instincts. Democracy leads us to sneer at chivalry and romance and beauty and devotion, and it's a fraud. We, the people, are in charge of nothing whatsoever. The continued existence of the income tax and daylight savings time, which we all hate, yet which we are powerless to get rid of, proves this.
Yeah, very true. I can't argue with that.
Who controls daylight savings time? Is that a global thing? Like, who's the authority?
It's a national thing, and it's Congress that decide on that.
Wow. The Malebranche Davidian, he chimes in, and he says Saudi Arabia and Thailand look like they've definitely settled this question in favor of the LARPers. As Aquinas supposedly said, quote, against a fact, there is no argument.
Repeat that, please.
As Aquinas supposedly said.
No, the whole thing.
Oh, Saudi Arabia and Thailand look like they've definitely settled this question in favor of the LARPers. In other words, in favor of the monarch, the people who think monarchy is viable.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So that we were kind of talking about Saudi Arabia before, but we didn't mention Thailand.
Right. No, we did. I did mention Thailand. I touched on it. It's certainly Thailand is an interesting case because for such a long time, it really only existed because of its long reigning king, whose name I could never pronounce. He really, through one change of regime, one coup d'etat and another, he kept the country together.
Hmm.
He really did. And then, you know, and
Oh,
then,
okay.
and
Um.
he died. Everybody thought his son would be incapable of following the father, but he seems to have managed the way King Charles has, more or less successfully followed Queen Elizabeth.
Hmm. Well, I don't know if it's interesting because I don't know if Saudi Arabia and Thailand, at a glance, we would say are successful countries.
Let's put it this way: they work according to their own lights.
They work
You
according
know,
to their own lights. There we go. Okay.
I mean, they're not. They're hardly. They're hardly successful as like the United States. But I think you would have to say the United States are not. Uh, the United States are not really operating according to their principles,
Okay.
or the principles they claim, anyway.
Hmm. All right. Rob says, "Thank you for the prompt." This is super fan Rob. So he's a huge history buff. He says, "I think we can look at history to answer this question. In last days of the Roman Republic, the two parties no longer had any goal except power. Arrests and executions of political rivals were common. Augustus stepped in and set up a monarchy that lasted another 500 years. I see a similar turn of events as the most likely way for a modern state to become a monarchy. Another fictional version is Star Spangled Crown by our favorite author. While I think it more likely that Americans would ask an American dynasty, such as Kennedy or Bush, to take over rather than a
Uh,
European one, I could see our
uh,
politicians ceding power in a crisis, just as Charles describes in that book."
yeah, I doubt. I doubt highly that. I doubt highly that anything remotely like what I outlined in Star Spangled Crown would happen. But there's a certain amount of wishful thinking, a certain amount of historical parallelism, and above all, a desire to get the people who ran it to think outside the box that we've all been made to think in.
Hmm.
Uh, I have to admit, I laughed a lot while I was writing the book because there were a lot of inside jokes in Star Spangled Crown, inside to me personally. But then beyond that, uh, the most poignant moment in writing the book was that I was describing the crowd outside the White House when the body of the youngest prince was brought home for the war in Liberia. And the narrator had just lost his own cousin in the fighting in the Philippines. And this is a sort of a replay of a scene that's happened throughout history. And the grief of everyone who had lost loved ones in those wars was sort of united with that of the king for his own son. And then the crowd started singing, "'Twas all for our rightful king." And the king was overwhelmed. All he could say was, "My people, my very dear people." And as I'm writing this, I was tearing up. And, I thought, well, that's funny. None of these people ever existed. Not my narrator, not the king, not the prince, not the cousin, not any of these people. But it's because it was an archetype, as you might say. Uh, I remember when Zeta died back in '89, and when the Queen died. For that matter, when the Archduke Otto died in 2012, I really, Otto I knew personally. Zeta I never knew. The Queen, of course, I didn't know. But one certainly felt a loss. I remember where I was when I got the news about the Queen. I was in Romania, in Transylvania, Cluj, Klausenburg, Koloshvar. And I was having dinner with a couple of Romanian friends. And Axel sent me the news on my phone that the Queen had died. So I said, "Gentlemen, the Queen has died." So after we ate, we went out to the main square of Koloshvar and sang "God Save the King." and several people joined in.
All right.
Even though it wasn't their king or their queen or my queen.
Yeah. All right, we are running out of time, so I have to limit it to one more comment.
Hold on. I'm trying to catch up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're
Is it
running.
working?
Yes, yes.
Is it working? Have I caught up?
Well, we're at the end of the line, Charles. So yes. Rockhound says depends on what we mean by monarchy. And are we talking about a current republic returning or converting to a monarchy? Pretty much nowhere is going back to ancien regime-style monarchy, with the monarch deep in the operation of government, or anything more intense than socio-moralistic leadership, wherein the monarch is the notional superparent of the nation family and general unifying figurehead. Absent some black swan, likely a general global civilization-smashing disaster, that kind of setup has had its day and is popularly regarded as too kooky for real life. Now, some mild Scandinavia-style constitutional monarchy might be workable, but who gets installed as the monarch? Charles, what are your thoughts on this? This is interesting. So is the ancien regime-style monarchy, is it done? Forever gone? Not viable?
Well, the most viable thing is what we've got now, only more of it. The most viable thing is more crap pouring out of the sewer over us all that we get to play in. That's what's most viable. And that, and here I'll draw on Andrew from New Jersey, that is what we're likely to stay with until the collapse that our friend is afraid of. As far as the ancien regime goes, the ancien regime was actually just a stage in the development of the modern state. And you'll get that out of Joseph de Maistre. By the ancien regime, I mean the status of things as they were in the 18th century, the enlightened despots and all that. Returning to that would be like returning to any earlier stage of a given disease. You know, and of course, when you're in the tertiary stage of syphilis and you've got pieces falling off your face and things like that, the primary stage, we just had like vague headaches, you get nostalgic for it. The problem is we are in an historic drama of which the sloughing off of monarchy was an earlier stage. What we have now, the beautiful modern state, which we all pretend we have some control over, but in reality we mean nothing to, that's the reality. That is what will break down. And when it does, everything will depend on what the people are like. And that we can't predict.
Hmm.
I go back to that old saying, we do get the government we deserve. If he is right, and we'll never again have kings really involved in the governance of the state, it will be because we heartily deserve not to have them, because we deserve the slime we have now, or that we'll have in the future that replace this slime. Because, just because you get rid of slime doesn't mean you'll replace it with better slime. I mean, you can have scum and then replace it with worse scum.
Well, I'm a 90s kid with Nickelodeon. Slime is fun. People getting slimed all the time. Slimer from Ghostbusters. Sliming is fun.
Oh, I'll bet you live for election day.
Oh man. Your comment on the ancien regime and being at what is it? An evolution of the stage of a disease. That makes me want to bring up a quote on the show before, but I think it's a really poignant quote, which is that the institution of monarchy began to die when kings were no longer willing to die for their people.
Well, when they ceased to lead their troops into battle.
Yeah,
was the quote.
basically, yeah.
And
Is that a quote from someone else?
Yeah, that's a quote from Otto von Habsburg.
Ah, there we go. Okay.
And that, too, was part of the Ancien regime. The last British king, de jure, to lead his troops into battle was, of course, Monty Prince Charlie. And de facto was his enemy, George II. George III did not lead his troops into battle. William IV actually had been in battle as a naval officer long before he was king. Napoleon, of course, did nothing but lead his troops into battle. But no, it was a very. I think he's quite right. And that too is part of the decay of monarchy. You remember there's a famous scene in the Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian. Not Prince Caspian. Yes, Prince Caspian. Second volume, where Caspian offers to meet the usurper in single combat so that their armies don't have to fight.
Right.
That sort of thing happened. So, and of course, you think of the Crusades and men like Richard the Lionheart and Philip Augustus and Frederick Barbarossa leading their troops to the Holy Land. Barbarossa didn't make it; he drowned. But that it's a funny thing. But during World War One, the apart from Pope Benedict's initiative, there were three major initiatives for peace that came out during the war. The first and most famous was Blessed Karl's. Then his opponent, King Victor Emmanuel III, and King Albert of the Belgians, who also supported Blessed Karl's attempts. What did these three men have in common? They were at the front, whereas their political leadership were living it up back home. Well, the Belgians weren't, of course, but the other two were. Edward VIII, who everyone attacked as an appeaser and this and that because he didn't want to go to war with Germany. He'd been at the front and seen his chauffeur killed in front of him. So he really was not keen on Britain going to war again. As my late father used to say, there's no pacifist like a soldier.
All right. All right, that's going to do it for this episode, everyone. Been a nice long episode. Thank you for everyone who participated, or whether we read it on your comments on the show or not. Thank you for everyone. Charles, what is it if it's Monday?
Don't help me. It's off the menu.
What about the soul you save?
May well be your own.
See you next time, everyone.
Operators are standing by.